Good morning, everyone. My name is Annette Johns, and I'm the Associate Director of Policy and Practice with the Newfoundland and Labrador College of Social Workers. I will be the moderator for today's education event, Gender-Based Violence Counseling, Tools and Approaches that Empower. Today's webinar is a collaboration between the Canadian Association of Social Workers and the Newfoundland and Labrador College of Social Workers. We have over 600 social workers from across Canada registered for our event this morning, and I want to take this time to wish everyone a happy Social Work Month. As a profession, we do provide essential services and supports to enhance the well-being of individuals, families, groups, and communities. And how fitting that the theme for Social Work Month this year is In Critical Demand, Social Work is Essential. This webinar presentation will be approximately 75 minutes, followed by a question and answer period that I will moderate. Please note that all the details you need, like how to access the slide deck and other housekeeping information, is included in the blue and white icons at the bottom of your window. All these widgets are available there for your viewing. You can also resize and move around any of the elements that you see on your screen to customize your viewing experience. During the presentation, I encourage you to send in your questions using the question mark icon at any time, and I'll begin asking them at the end of the presentation. Please note that only the presenter and I can see those questions. And on that note, I now want to introduce our speaker, Dana Warren. And while her full bio is on the webinar platform, I do want to say a few introductory notes. Dana is a registered social worker here in Newfoundland and Labrador and is clinical team lead counselor at the St. John's Women's Centre. As a lifelong learner and feminist social worker, Dana brings passion to her work to ensure that services are equitable, flexible, and centers on people as experts. Whether it's in counseling, facilitation, supervision, or policy work, she has lived by the notion that people are acknowledged and deserve to be heard. Dana understands the significant implications of gender-based violence on those who experience it and for all of our communities in general. And through her work, Dana has been instrumental in the creation of accessible, low-barrier, trauma-informed individual and group counseling, supervision models, innovative professional development, training, and community skill building. Her latest passion project, Empowering Them, is the first free and accessible e-course on gender-based violence of its kind, available throughout Newfoundland and Labrador. So I'm so pleased that Dana is delivering this national webinar for us today in celebration of Social Work Month, and I'll now turn the virtual platform over to Dana to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Annette. It's wonderful to be here. I'm so happy to be presenting to you today. And throughout this presentation, you're going to hear me talking quite a lot. It's kind of a two-part. First of all, we're going to explore kind of biases, stereotypes, and assumptions, and do a little knowledge building around gender-based violence and what it looks like. And our second half is using this before, during, and after framework to consider skills, understandings, and approaches to actually how we do work in the counseling chair. So you'll hear me say in the chair a few times, and that's what I mean. In the counseling chair is what I'm referring to. So I'll get going. So today, we're going to consider the stigma and stereotypes surrounding GBV and how they impact our work. I'd like to position myself in the world. So I'm a white, middle-class, cis woman working with women and non-binary people. My pronouns are she, her, and I call myself a feminist and consider my approach to work to be trauma-informed, collaborative, and strengths-based, centering the person in the approach, which I can attest to being pretty messy at times, and I embrace that. The topic today is challenging. I'm going to invite you all to be detectives and lean into curiosity and really notice what comes up for you. Caring for your own needs is a critical part of our work. And if you need help or support or guidance, please reach out and utilize the services and resources in your own life. And I am also more than happy to follow up with anyone about anything. This presentation is really the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the topic. And I encourage you all to make gender-based violence learning an essential part of your professional development. especially considering GBV outside of the heteronormative frameworks of relationships. So I want you to consider types of violence. Internal, interpersonal, those are kind of the two pieces I'll focus on today. But also violence occurs at a cultural level, an institutional level, and a systemic level. And those other areas really inform how we work at a micro level. So you're going to hear me talk about women a lot, which is not discounting the fact that gender-based violence impacts other genders and marginalized groups disproportionately. And if you add the rural-urban divide, it's even worse. According to Stats Canada 2021, more than 4 in 10 women have experienced some form of intimate partner violence in their lifetimes. In 2018, 44% of women reported experiencing some form of psychological, physical, or sexual violence by an intimate partner in their lifetimes. And research shows that women are disproportionately experiencing the most severe forms of intimate partner violence. So the next piece that I'm going to get into is I do what I call a W5. So let's explore the who, the what, the where, the when, and the how of IPV. So I hope that you know when I'm asking these questions, I'm considering you. Remember, I'm asking you to reflect. I wish we were interactive, but here we are, doing our best with what we got. So who does it happen to? Well, everybody. Even professionals who know the difference come with bias and stereotypes. Abuse crosses all boundaries: culture, class, location, economic status, color, age, you name it. It affects all different types of people, but we live in a world that believes it happens to a certain type of person. And that's just plain old stigma and stereotypes. We also know that violence disproportionately impacts queer and trans, Indigenous, Black, racialized, those living with disabilities, young people, poor women, and older women. So what happens? Violence takes many forms, and it's defined by the person who's experiencing it. And that's how we've made up these documents throughout our lives, throughout the last 50 years. Wheels of this form have existed for a very long time. In our work, we often hear folks dismissing their own experiences based on a long-held belief around us that physical violence is the worst violence. We also hear folks from the chair tell us that psychological violence is actually horrific, and no one type of abuse is worse than any other type. So this wheel was actually adapted from the Duluth model created in 1980. And I want to take a look for a moment and invite you to take a look at it as I go through this piece. But I want you to consider what's missing. And also, often many pieces of the wheel are at play. So using intimidation, maybe making a person afraid by using looks, actions, gestures, smashing things, destroying property, abusing pets, displaying weapons, using emotional abuse, putting people down, making them feel bad about themselves, calling them names, making them think they're crazy, playing mind games, humiliation, guilt, making them feel guilty. Isolation, a very big part of what happens. Controlling what they do, controlling who they see and talk to, what they read, where they go, limiting their outside environment, using jealousy to justify their actions, minimizing, denying, and blaming. Making light of abuse and not taking their concerns about it very seriously, invalidating, saying that the abuse didn't happen, shifting responsibility for abusive behavior, saying that they caused it. I hear that a lot. Using children. So making them feel guilty about the children, using the children to relay messages, using visitation to harass them, threatening to take the kids away, using male privilege, treating them like a servant, making all the big decisions, acting like the master of the castle, being the one to define the men's and women's roles in the house and outside the house, and using societal privilege in general. And I think using economic abuse is one of the things that becomes a barrier to leaving quite often. So preventing her from getting or even keeping a job, making her ask for money, giving her an allowance, taking her money, not letting her know about or have access to family income. And finally, using coercion and threats, making and or carrying threats to do something to hurt her, threatening to leave them, threatening to commit suicide. This is something that I have heard many, many times from women about why they also stay, because they love their partners. To report her to, systems that she might be utilizing, making her drop charges when she is in the justice system, and making her do illegal things. So I asked you to think about what was missing. One of the realms that is missing from this, for instance, is the digital realm. In our work, this has become a whole new frontier. We do a whole training on digital environments and digital abuse these days. As I touched on in the beginning, violence occurs at the meso and the macro level as well. So structural and institutional violence is real. For example, in justice systems, particularly, it is alive and well. And a lot of folks who experience violence find themselves in a justice system that feels very unfair. It also misses the experiences of marginalized groups. It doesn't talk about using belief systems against folks. Like I've heard people talk about, there's another wheel that exists that talks about spiritual abuse. When you're working with immigrant people, it often comes up, they will make up stories about how our culture works, about how language works. So there's all kinds of ways of feeling the impacts of abuse. And at the center of that, I think what I want to talk about is that phrase right there in the middle of the center called power and control. So all abusive behaviors are intended to have the same effect: to control, intimidate, coerce, and manipulate another person. So, next question, how does it happen? I'm going to assume that many of you might be familiar with the cycle of abuse. And these days, there are numerous considerations for the cycle, but I think most professionals would agree that there is a cycle and it looks something like this. Let's remember that most folks in relationships with an abusive partner may find it difficult to see any pattern in the abuse. Their behaviors might seem bizarre and very unpredictable. And when we talk about the abuse as having a pattern and a purpose, they begin to see it for themselves. No one enters into a relationship looking for abuse. We are attracted to the positive characteristics and qualities. And outwardly, abusive behavior is rarely shown in the beginning stages of a relationship. At the start, actually, it's pretty sweet. Women often describe it as picture perfect, everything they dreamed of and more. But then something happens. It can be a mild invalidation or an explosive episode. And their gut instinct kicks in to say, oh, this is wrong. But it is immediately addressed with remorse, I'm sorries, apologies, and promises. And their intuition is minimized, dismissed, kind of explained away, and eventually silenced. I'm not saying that relationships don't experience ups and downs, disagreements, and differencing of opinions. This is different than that. So the honeymoon phase is much like the beginning of a relationship. Um, the honeymoon sounds like, apologies, you feel more respected, communication improves, your partner might be more attentive, they might help around the house, help with the children, promise to make changes. I often hear folks talk about this is a time when their partners might say they go to counseling or seek help. Often lots of gifts, giving compliments, spending time with the family, like the relationship that you want, really. But this phase is often really confusing because what appears to be caring behavior is controlling. I often ask women if they can refuse the gifts or the compliments. And in an abusive relationship, the answer is often no. I had a woman talk to me once about, yeah, I got a new phone, but I'm just being controlled and followed on the phone. I don't want 100 texts. So you can see how that gift giving can really help people take perspective around what's happening. The honeymoon phase is followed by the tension building phase, and I think everybody knows what tension is. But in a relationship, I had a woman say she can feel it as she's walking down the stairs in the morning. When you can feel it in the air, there's more insults, threats, sarcasm, jealousy, accusations out of the air, lots of fault finding, an even greater grip on controlling what the person might get up to. Mood changes are very quick and like you can't understand why it's going on. There's emotional distance. And women often talk about it as walking on eggshells, excuse me, or living in fear of rocking the boat, or and then being stuck in trying to avoid escalation or tipping people over the edge, right? Or tipping them into that explosive phase. And the explosion phase can be very, very intense. Usually comes with intimidating body language. They might constrain someone from leaving, um, throwing things, slamming doors, getting the silent treatment, the wall for days and days, physical assault, name calling, swearing, yelling, driving too fast. That's one I've heard a lot. You're in a car and you feel danger and there's nothing you can do about it, even when you ask, can you please slow down? And the explosion phase can also escalate in intimidation and frequency as the relationship progresses. So naturally, after the explosion, most people describe a return to the honeymoon phase. Women often tell us that they try to manage the relationship and avoid the tension building and the explosive phases, and that consumes all of their energy and concentration. So where does it happen? I purposely chose a door um, because it happens often behind closed doors. It happens, we know it happens online, we know it happens in systems, but women talk about what their partners are like out in the world versus behind closed doors. Um, you know, a lot of friends, families, co-workers don't understand what people are talking about if they start talking about what's happening in the relationship because what they see is a great human, a good person who appears to be paying attention and loving them. But that's not what's happening at home or online. Also, we don't talk about it. That's another door that we close in our minds, I think. In our e-course, we demonstrate a scenario with there's two coworkers and there's a knock on one coworker's office door and she comes in and she says, "You got flowers?" And you can tell that there's tension in the woman's face who's receiving the flowers. because the flowers is a demonstration of that honeymoon phase. So we don't often see that um, as anything negative. Um, but if we notice patterns like that, like the honeymoon, the flower giving, the gift giving, is a very real thing that happens out in the world. So why does it happen? Well, this is a long list for me and one that I've contemplated a lot. I believe that the tendency to make the problem an individual problem and not a community problem is at the center of why. GBV has been conceptualized as a private issue and a private form of violence. You know, on the other end of the scale are long held beliefs about GBV perpetuated. Excuse me. GBV impacts the workforce, medical services, social services, families, criminal justice systems, and the well being of our society as a whole. Yet the responsibility, for the most part, has fallen on the individual to fix it. And that's what I hear a lot when I'm working with people. Excuse my frog. I'll just be a second, I'm taking some water. What I like to do next is share an exercise with you, excuse me, that we often utilize in our closed groups and trainings. And it's an exercise that helps explore the stigma and stereotypes surrounding GBV. So I'm going to invite you, you're probably near somewhere where you can have a piece of paper and a pen. And if you're not, that's okay. In your mind, I'm going to ask you to reflect on this question. So we live in a society that reflects certain long-held beliefs and attitudes about intimate partner violence, gender-based violence. So consider this. How do families and friends, systems, and society view women who've experienced abuse? So what's the message out there? Just reflect on that. I'm going to share with you some of the things that we have heard over the years. They say things like they're weak. She should stay for the kids. So when the relationship is over, the abuse is too. That's the belief that's out there. That abuse is only physical, that the rest is just relationships. A woman who leaves is selfish, or she's a bad mother. She's breaking up the family. Same message if she stays. My daughter would never put herself in that position. She's stupid. Mothers are responsible for fixing the problem. You need to work on your relationship. I've heard a lot. They're easy or gullible. They're stupid for staying and selfish for leaving. The world doesn't talk about it. And if they do, they say things like they should know better, or they asked for it, or they're all like that, demonstrating intergenerational violence as some kind of pattern that exists when, while it does, yes, it also doesn't. Or they don't know any better, or they must be poor and uneducated, or lack skills. When we were researching for our e-course, we gathered a list of myths, and we wanted to make sure that we explored these myths so we could start myth busting. You hold these biases. I hold these biases. And we will hear it often coming out of the mouths of the people that we work with in the counseling realm. So when you're helping a person who you think is experiencing abuse or harm, the goal is to get them to leave. What we know is leaving is very, very challenging. And it is the time that is the most dangerous for the person leaving and or their children, their pets. A lot of people stay for animals. They stay for all kinds of reasons, and we'll talk a bit more about that. But leaving is dangerous and it takes time. Another myth, abuse only happens to a certain kind of person in a certain kind of household. And we know that's not true. People who don't leave or keep going back to the abuser deserve what they get. It takes two to tango. I hear this a lot working with people in the chair. Like, I give as good as I get, or, you know, I fight back, and I always attempt to talk about intent. So if a person's intent is to defend themselves or protect, people, pets, their possessions, it's very different than violence and its intention to coerce or control or manipulate or get what they want. Who were abused as kids will abuse or be abused as adults. There's no strong evidence that that is necessarily the correlation that we can make in every case. Does it happen? Yes, but there is no strong story that tells us that this is the case. People who abuse are mentally ill. Well, that's just ridiculous. People who abuse can have issues with mental illness. People who are the kindest people in the world can too. Dealing with abuse is a woman's responsibility or an individual's responsibility, and that's just not true. So what happens in someone else's home is none of my business. This is, I think, one of the things, harkening back to the behind closed doors. It doesn't only happen in people's houses. It happens in our workplaces. It happens in our communities, and that is very much our business. Trying to get involved could actually make the problem worse. I think trying to get involved and not asking or checking in can impact the relationship. But if we actually just check in and ask people what they need and listen to what they're asking for, um, people feel seen and supported and validated, and that makes a huge difference in their mental health. Gender-based violence is caused by drinking or drug use. It's intensified or exasperated, but it's not caused by. Abuse that is happening in same-sex relationships is not as bad, and we just know that's not true. And the notion that the violence ends when the relationship ends. In fact, the violence very much increases when relationships end. And it shifts into other areas, especially if you're co-parenting or sharing any kind of resource or attempting to get, your fair share out of a marriage that is ending. It is very challenging. So there is a second part to this activity. I'm going to invite you to once again reflect. When we're in group, this is one of the most powerful twists of all. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a moment. So the next question that I'm going to ask you is, who are women who have experienced abuse really? Not what others are saying about them, that's just what we did, but who are they really? In our closed groups over the years, here's some of the things that they talked about. They're survivors. They're strong and brave, determined, goal oriented, wise, intelligent, and often stuck in the cycle. They're free. We work. We're smart. We're compassionate. We're not responsible for fixing them. We're responsible for ourselves. We're good friends and allies. We know better. We're good mothers. We have hopes, dreams, and talents. We desire to get back to being us again. We are lovable, worthy, and beautiful. And it's not our fault. The point of this activity is really to emphasize the impact of stigma and stereotypes, and to help acknowledge that people who experience abuse are not the labels that are placed upon them. Remember, doing the work that we do, we have an opportunity to see people just as they are. We do the very important work of inviting them out of the shadows of shame and isolation and accepting them just as they are, and hearing and believing and honoring their experiences. And what does it mean to honor someone's experience? Not to judge them. It's not our job to fix them. And that was something in my experience that has brought me great relief. We can, though, take opportunities to counter those voices that fill their heads, to plant seeds that say, you got this. You're the expert in your own life, in your own story. And that listening to your voice, even when it's difficult, can really help shift the storyline and make room for whatever it is that people need. And this is called working from a strengths-based approach. Bias is unconscious, and beliefs are lifelong, and they take time and effort to unlearn. It takes work to change our beliefs. This is about new pathways in our brain. It's like walking through this forest. Our belief systems want to take us on the path in this picture. It's easy to walk on. It's well traveled. It's automatic. It tells us a story. We know what we want when we're looking at this. But managing bias and those deeply entrenched belief systems is like bushwhacking through Tuckamore. You need to get out your axe and forge a new path in your brain. Can you notice that little tiny opening there? This is a place to start, always. But it's hard work. I've been doing this work for 6 years, full time. And I tell myself every time I meet somebody in the chair, this happens to everyone. Check your assumptions at the door. I want to take this next moment to, invite you to make the switch now into how I'm going to connect gender-based violence and mental health. So moving into that counseling realm. Let's start with some research. So intimate partner violence and intimate partner violence exposure have direct and measurable correlations. IPV is a significant public health issue. So according to the British Journal of Psychiatry 2019, and I'll never forget finding this article because it kind of gave evidence to what I have been noticing in the data that we collect. When women present with depression, anxiety, and serious mental health issues, a past or present history of intimate partner violence should be explored to aid in management plans. So in the descriptor, I think I talked about how even though people are often connected to service providers like doctors, lawyers, social workers, and counselors, we still miss this part. We miss making the correlation between anxiety and depression and other disorders and intimate partner violence. Approximately 20% of IPV survivors reported experiencing a new onset of psychiatric disorders, such as major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and PTSD, and a wide range of substance use disorders. So the evidence is there, and even more so in the last 3 years. That's for sure. We've been collecting data for about 5 years, and yeah, it's significant. And the World Health Organization and the Public Health Agency of Canada have both recognized GBV as a significant public health issue. So, how does it impact people? And that's the part I'd like to explore next. It impacts their sense of self, self worth, self esteem, self trust. And survivors often internalize the verbal abuse from their partners. They may blame themselves for their situation, experience fear, as well as anger and resentment, shame and guilt towards themselves, mostly. Chronic abuse might result in compulsive and obsessive behaviors, and in its extreme, it can lead to self destruction or suicide. On a physical level, you might see or notice lack of appetite, overeating, digestive issues, headaches, no energy, um, hyperactive, an overactive fight, flight, fawn, freeze response system, long-term health issues that impact, heart disease. In the mental and emotional realm, you might notice severe swings, tearfulness, numbness, disconnected, unstable, feeling hopeless, hypervigilance, anxiety, depression, anger, grief, shame, the feeling of going crazy. And then, like some people talk about a saturation of feelings. If anything else happens, I'm just going to go off the deep end. Cognitively, major effect on the brain. Brain fog is dominant. Lack of access to logic and reason, decision making. We're offline in survival mode all the time. So that is overactivated. On a social, relational level, it impacts how people read social cues. Um, and then there's this general lens of distrust, even of friends, community, isolated from community. It impacts future intimate relationships. And people often get labeled by essential services like justice, health, and social services. So it impacts how you receive service, if you receive service, if you're believed. On a family level, relationships with children, immediate family, how you parent, behaviorally, well, everything you can think of. It's closely tied to thoughts and feelings. So, even that feeling of stuckness or lack of routine or lack of being able to get it together financially. But this is one of the biggest arenas that make people stay, right? Housing, food, legal costs, your life savings, lack of support by organizations and institutions. Spiritually, we just hear this so much, those dreams that you had of family, of future, hopes, plans. People find themselves questioning their faith and their previous beliefs. And that internalization of stigma is so serious. And they internalize a worldview and the abuser's view. So imagine the complexity of leaving. So if you're already in this state, then you had to navigate systems and families and barriers and your own internalized message, and on and on and on. I don't know if any of you, I'd say some of you are aware of a woman named Anna Maria Tremonti. She's a CBC reporter who has, I think, been in the business for over 40 years, and she just recently left her day job and started a podcast. And the podcast is about her experience of abuse. So when she was, I think she was 23, she was in an abusive relationship, and she talks about her first day in a job interview with the CBC. She wore a fancy suit, and underneath that fancy suit was the physical demonstration of what was happening to her in a relationship. She also decided at that point to never tell anyone what had happened to her, because she was worried about, first of all, being biased in her capacity to report, She was worried about getting a job and holding a job. And her husband was a reporter. So I know that was a long time ago, but it demonstrates how deeply, deeply folks who are experiencing abuse are impacted in every part of their life. I just want to talk a little bit now about um, what it sounds like when we're in conversations or in sessions with people. So I'm calling this section the language GBV. I don't know about you guys, but how often do I hear about toxic relationships or unhealthy relationships? Or they're a narcissist, or, people are talking about frequent breakups. I mean, anxiety and depression goes without being said. I just talked about that for a little bit. Or I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. We fight all the time. It's another piece. They always want to know where I am. Being monitored is a very big part of the experience. Multiple texts, phone calls. I was actually sitting with a woman this week, and while we were sitting together, her phone went off at least 30 times. And I asked her, does your partner know you're here? Oh, no, I could never let him know I'm here. Hearing things like, I feel like I can't say anything, or they freak out at the smallest things, or I feel trapped in my relationship. I feel like I can't do anything right. And they're trying to diagnose what's wrong and what's fixable and how they can get better. A lot of people walk in this door going, there's something wrong with me. There must be something about what I'm up to. Me and my partner are fighting all the time. I'm going to tease that out, right? You might notice an increase in substance use, absenteeism in their workplace. They might come in being burnt out. Like, there's nothing wrong with asking questions when you hear these kinds of pieces in the exchanges that you're up to. They are exhibiting self-blame, self-doubt. And one that I've noticed a lot is perfectionism. So they're doing everything right. And they hold more balls than you can ever imagine possible. And I find this especially, and I don't mean to generalize, but I find this especially in, honestly, middle class people, because of the really deeply internalized shame about being in a relationship where abuse is happening. So they make everything perfect on the outside. So what about the before? So now I'm going to sort of shift into this, excuse me, concept of before, during, and after. Everybody wants to do the right thing when we're learning how. When I started in this work, I thought I just had to go out and know everything. And it is important to have knowledge. It's critical, in fact, especially considering all the biases and assumptions that we know that the world makes about what this looks like. But I'm going to harken back for a moment to the descriptor for this workshop today. You are all here holding knowledge. You're here today to enhance skills that you already have. You're adding to the knowledge that you already come to the table with. And while we have knowledge, it's really important to consider it as something that we hold on the side of what we're doing together. We don't want it to be the wall between us and the people that we're working with. This is a very collaborative process. Every time I walk into a session in our drop-in counseling, I remind myself that gender-based violence doesn't have one look or one feel. When someone comes here, they come in, they will spend time with an intake person, and then that intake person comes to the counselor and we do an exchange. And how many times have I found myself thinking, as a person is giving me some information who I'm about to meet, I might hear like, who were they referred by? If they're referred by CSSD, which for us is social services, even though I know my mind will so quickly go to a place that kind of embodies an assumption, and I stop myself and say, "Hey, you can leave that at the door. You can check it at the door." So it's a mindset, not a script. It's important to acknowledge your biases and assumptions. It can really make a difference. Educating yourself is a part of what we do all the time, doing the work that we do. Um, One thing that took me a little while to learn, it's like taking time to like really recognize and acknowledging your own triggers, because they can really impact your responses in the room, and responses that you don't even know about, like your facial responses, your body response, your breathing. I remind myself, and especially we have 4 counselors here, we do lots of student placements as well. Listening is a powerful intervention. And people report over and over and over again how listening is the thing that they appreciate. Supporting folks where they're at is what we do all the time. And it's about relationship building and listening and connecting. And sometimes that's enough. Um, you don't have to fix anything or to be an expert in this work. As I said earlier, you can hold knowledge, but it doesn't have to be the thing that you're doing. You're not fixing people. And with an attitude of believing, people will see that and almost smell it. So what about during? Um, I think how you set up a session with someone is pretty critical. Um, you know, your affect and your body language matters, and I think staying open and being and demonstrating your compassion is really useful. I actually believe relationship starts, in the first minute of meeting somebody. You're also probably going to hear some really difficult things. So, um, harkening back to that idea of how you prepare yourself, how you present yourself is going to make a difference in how people feel about you and how you feel about them. Um, I want to talk for a second about our intake approach. We talk about the limits of confidentiality, but we also talk about what it would look like if we had to break them. So, that notion of nothing about you without you, we really utilize that idea to say, hey, if you talk about something in a session where we feel like we might need to invite another resource into the conversation, then we're going to do that together. So, for example, if someone, and I've had to do this a couple of times in my time here for sure, like if someone is very much in crisis and I feel it's necessary that it's gone outside of what I can handle and I want to call the mental health crisis unit, I'm actually going to make those phone calls with the person, being very aware of what I'm up to. So I do my best to give as much information without overwhelming people up front. Um, we ask questions about if we can leave messages, how it might be best and safest to communicate to them. Um, and that's not something every resource does, but it's very, very smart. It's very interesting when someone says, here's my number, but you can't leave a message ever. Um, we like to consider safety, of course, that's first and foremost, but not just the safety in that kind of physical sense. We like to talk about emotional safety. And one thing I'm big on as a counselor is creating safety in the session. So I'll give you an example of that. So when someone comes into the counseling room, I might say something like, um, hi, my name is Dana. So happy that you came in today. Um, Women tell us how difficult it can be to come in the door. So, you made it. You're brave. You're here. I also want them to know that whatever you want to talk about, when we know that people's lives are really complicated and they might have a lot on the go, but I want you to know that I can handle it. This is what I do for a living. I'm a professional. You're not burdening me with what you're allowed to talk about. I love this work. I find it honorable work, and I'm sitting here because I know what I can do. And I don't say that because I want them to think I'm some expert. I say that because often we hear people talk about how they don't want to burden anybody. So I'm inviting the burden. I'm inviting people to really talk about the things that they want to talk about, that it's okay to do that here. Of course, if there's any issue that pops up, you're going to end up steering the ship, and that's okay. Um, Asking people questions is, I think, one of the most valuable tools that I have doing the kind of work that I do. You don't want to tell someone they're in an abusive relationship. You want to really tread lightly around what they say. And when we're curious and present, it reduces assumptions. It's a wonderful thing. That's all you got to do. Sometimes I say, lean into the conversation. Um, Go slow. You don't need to jump in. You don't need to know all the details always. I often will, sort of pause people where they are if I see them, if I'm aware of their body language, and you can tell that they're too far gone or they're really activated. I'll just say, can we take a breath? Or do you want a sip of water? Or can I get you something? Like anything to slow down a process so people don't flood and get too activated. Um, I don't find very often that it comes out of people's mouths that they need to pause or that they're feeling overwhelmed, but the body shows us that. I'm just, you remember how we talked about how people can be impacted physically by not eating? I see that a lot where people will come in for counseling and they haven't had a bite to eat. So I might offer someone, a cracker and a piece of cheese, or I have granola bars in my chair. The said versus the implied. I was working with a woman the other day, and she said, "I don't get what's wrong with me. I just keep going back." And what I'm hearing of that is, "Oh, you keep going back, but you also keep leaving. So what are you doing when you go back?" Like a question like that helps someone go, "Oh, I'm not ready yet." Often people are collecting the things that they do to make it permanent. Often they're making choices for other things in their lives, like their pets, their children, their own safety. Maybe they don't have enough and they couldn't make it out there, so they had to get back in the game. This takes time. And remember back to that idea that it's not about getting anybody to leave, it's about supporting them and encouraging them and adding more resources to their lives. I like to hear it, acknowledge it, and really underline the courage and the bravery that exists in their experience. It's important to mirror their language. Um, don't label it. I had a woman describe her life as a shit show. Well, my question back is, can you tell me what that looks like? Tell me about your shit show. Like I have a list of the symptomatology that I am looking for to, it's kind of like, your computer screen in your brain. But I'm not using that in how I talk to people. I'm really trying to reflect the mirror language so that people can share their own experience. It's also really important to normalize it because so many people think it's only them or it's something that they're doing wrong or they're broken or if only they could get better at communication, if only they didn't piss their partners off, if only they were more educated. Like that list is very, very long. So what I like to do is something I call bringing the world into the room. So I use the examples of other women to really help normalize the person's experience. Excuse me, I'm so dry. So when I started out in the work, I didn't have a lot of experiences talking to people about GBV. So there's a really good resource. I use the book When Love Hurts by Jill Corey and Karen McCandless Davis. And I use the stories that are in that book to be able to bring the world into the room and normalize and validate people who I'm working with. It's also important to be direct and ask when you don't know. There's nothing wrong with asking. In fact, you're demonstrating respect. You're demonstrating how you're centering that person in their own experience. And providing examples, as I said, is really valuable. Um, I remember working with a woman who was describing how her sleep was interrupted. She left the relationship and she still couldn't get any pattern of sleep going on. And she was talking about even when I slept, I miss him in bed. And I said, "Did he ever wake you up in the middle of the night?" And her eyes bulged out of her head, and she couldn't believe that this was something that she'd experienced a lot. And I was able to say, we've heard women talk about that over and over again, how sometimes their sleep is interrupted, their patterns are interrupted. And you could just feel the difference in the person when she was looking out at me, knowing that I was getting it. So bringing the person into the room, bringing stories into the room really helps people understand their own experiences. Um, it's important to tease out the relationship. Um, we're not only talking about the bad stuff, but we're talking about the relationship over time. So, you remember I talked about how the honeymoon phase is like the beginning of the relationship. It's important to understand what people are experiencing and to validate the complexity of the feelings that people are experiencing, right? They're in love often, and they very much love the partner who is abusing them. So walking people through their experiences helps them take perspective. Ask questions to prompt that perspective taking. Um, Most people are in the room trying to fix what's wrong, and they don't necessarily get that there are issues in the relationship that are not because of something that they've done. One of the questions I use lots is, what do you think your partner's response would be if they knew you were here? Like in a healthy relationship, even if there's issues or problems, if any person in that relationship went off and got some help, I don't think that the other person would necessarily be criticizing that. But in abusive relationships, you are shut down and no one wants you where you are. And this question can really help people take that perspective that they need to go, whoa, okay, there's more going on here than I thought. It's good to explore power and control. I use the wheel, I use the cycle, I talk about the cycle. Um, I often say, be open. I'm saying be open about how leaving and going back is a reality. Most people think they hear about, like, how can you love a person who's abusing you? Well, it's the reality of being in a relationship. Nobody gets into a relationship usually and stays without falling in love and becoming attached. And that's why this is so confusing. Talk to people about what's in their control and what's out of their control. Like giving people the ability to look at the little things that they're doing to keep themselves safe, to keep their children safe, to keep their lives together, is really validating and empowering. And, they get told all the time that they're stupid for doing X or Y or Z. Um, I had a woman the other day who I asked her, "So what have you learned or what are you doing in your life that is making a difference to you feeling better or different?" And I could, like, her power came alive when she said, I never put the car in the driveway without backing it in. And I always make sure the tank is half full. And I know he's watching me, and he used to come into the bathroom with me. But now I knock on his bedroom door because they're separated and living in different rooms. And I ask him, does he need to go into the bathroom before I go in? So she had all these little tiny things that she was doing to kind of take control of her life. And she came alive. She came back into the room as I was having that conversation with her. Because she never ever saw that as something that she was doing that was smart. She just saw it as something she had to do to survive. Um, I'll tell you one little other story. Sometimes people talk about the cycle when they start to notice it. They might instigate a move from tension to explosion to honeymoon so that they can get their needs met or get their children's needs met. Um, this woman I worked with talked about, like, your child is having a birthday party on a Saturday. And on Tuesday morning, you feel the tension. You know what's coming. You've been around the cycle a few times. And they'll just push that to the explosive phase so they can get back to the honeymoon phase so they can have that party. That's smart, not necessarily stupid. The work that we're doing is bridge work. After safety, our goal is to help connect people to more than one person or resource and start to really destigmatize this topic and break through those myths and stereotypes that are surrounding this work. Use resources, share resources. We have a safety plan here that we work with. We also do something called an emotional safety plan. I offer people websites, our e-course. I tell them about programs, shelters, housing options, legal supports. A really good question to consider is think about, why do people stay? And then provide options in the context of their lives, if you feel they're interested. Like, I think about the stages of change when I'm doing this work. What am I hearing about where people are in terms of the stage of change? Sometimes I'm just offering options. Sometimes I'm just listening and validating what they're saying. Sometimes I'm making a list of what they want to do in order to leave. It really depends on what I hear and how I hear it. So I try not to get ahead of myself. Also, as I'm finishing up a session, I'm summarizing what happened. I'm reviewing the things that we do. I'd encourage anyone to give them notes. Can you imagine taking notes in your own session, given the impacts of abuse in a relationship? So here, that's what I do a lot. I just take notes for people, and then I hand them back to them. Do consider consent if there is follow-up, if they've asked you to do anything. Those are important parts of what we do as social workers, for sure. And ask yourself, can I invite this person back? Often the invitation to come back can be considered hope for someone. We do drop-in counseling here, so a follow-up sometimes happens, sometimes it doesn't. I think that invitation is always leaving the door open for people to feel connected, to feel seen, and to feel understood. So there's kind of like a number of slides there now about kind of the during. I'm going to turn now to the after. Debrief. That's the word I have to say. The purpose of debriefs, well, I can go on and on. I do a whole workshop around this. Debriefing is essential for personal and professional growth. It encourages reflection on what's happened, not only in the counseling session, but what's happened for you. Um, it helps us consider what we might be learning, about what we're seeing, about what we're doing. We identify informed and realistic steps towards change in those conversations often. It prevents burnout. It safeguards us. Debriefing is actually trauma informed and it's critical self care. There are ways to not debrief. Most of the time we're not retelling or judging. If we reflect on our own experience and what happened for us, we can often tie a bow on it and stop the worrying. Um, what do I want to say about this? So, in the beginning of doing this kind of work, I would often worry about the people I was working with. And I, first of all, want to say that is a very, very human thing to do. Worrying about the people that you work with is just, it's like, it's our mirror neurons going off. Someone is saying they're in danger somehow, and us responding to that makes sense. But how I've been able to contextualize this and work with this is remembering that the people we're working with have been surviving for far longer than we have had the relationship. They've been doing that before we came along, and they're going to do it after. And that's not to be cold or callous. It's just to uh, take off the super cave. You know, people have resources. They are very smart. Look, they've been surviving these relationships for a very long time. And I think when we debrief appropriately, we can not take it home. So some questions I might use might be, what are you noticing about yourself? Uh, were you present? If not, when did you step out? What happened? Uh, did the content impact you of what happened? What went well is a really good question to ask yourself or to debrief with somebody. Or what might you do differently the next time? So debriefing is a very valuable piece of our work and one that often gets skipped in busy environments. But even if you take a minute or two to reflect before you move on to that next thing, I think it's pretty critical. So I hope this kind of before, during, and after framework can help you get a sense of how you can be present in this kind of work and how you can get into this kind of work. And the thing that I want you to remember the most is it's not a script, it's a mindset. Asking questions and listening is an essential intervention. I think we have probably seen about 2,500 people over the 5 years that I've been working here in our drop-in counseling. And by far, the number one thing that people talk about is being heard, being validated. So all we really got to do well is to listen and be present. I want to share, before we turn into our questions, I want to share a couple of things with you. One of them is this is a quote that let me try again. I subscribe to a meditation app called 10% Happier, and they send out a weekly article. And so Dr. Jay Michelson, who's their editor, was talking about the Ukraine. And he says, the capacity of human beings to other those different from us is as destructive as ever, most importantly among those with power and privilege. But it's found in all of us. As soon as I fail to remember that everyone loves like I do, suffers like I do, and is as human as I am, it's easy to blow off their suffering, minimize it, or pretend it doesn't exist. And that to me embodies this idea of this issue being an individual issue. You know, gender-based violence is everyone's responsibility. I'd just like to take a moment to talk about the e-course that I've kind of mentioned a couple of times. We created this e-course. We just launched it in November. we found ourselves, like, over the sort of last 10 years or so of doing this kind of work here at the Women's Center, a couple times a week you get a phone call from someone saying, someone in my life is experiencing, I think they might be having a hard time in the relationship and I don't know what to do. So we created an e-course that would take a look at the bigger picture and really we wanted to make a community resource that would address what was happening. So when we created the e-course, we looked all across the country and within our own province here in Newfoundland at what existed out there already. And what we found was that most of the existing programs were written by experts, and they were made for professionals who really already work with people who've been abused, or the programs were specifically tailored to people who were actively experiencing abuse, and specifically women. And that leaves out an awful lot of people. We realized we needed to do something different, and so we created this e-course. It's called Empowering Them. And the course has very much been informed by our community. And I think the difference is it's for everyone. So it's for anyone who might be experiencing abuse, but it's also for those who are just curious and want to learn more about the topic. Excuse me. It's for people who have watched their friend be harassed by someone, but who didn't know how to intervene. It's for women, men, gender diverse people who may have experienced abuse or who may have abused someone else. It's for people across the province, from the tip of Labrador to the bottom of the southern shore, whether it's something they already know about or not. And we have made it so it's for the ages of 14 up, because everyone is capable of recognizing the difference between a relationship that's respectful and one that's harmful. The course wasn't created to shame or judge or lay blame. It was really created to empower everyone to recognize abuse and address it. So it's entirely free. It's accessible anywhere that there's an internet connection. It's available 24/7, 365 days a year. It takes about an hour and a half. And we've created something for the community that can be accessed without a wait list any time of day, because we know that when someone is looking for support around an issue like this, it doesn't often fit neatly into our traditional business hours. Also in the course are links to province-wide resources and supports. Like we have a provincial domestic violence helpline. It covers a wide variety of information about GBV, and we really concentrate on giving users valuable skills and realistic strategies to address it. We do this through interactive quizzes, activities, videos, and scenarios. And by the end of the course, we hope users will know how to recognize the signs of abuse, how to tell the difference between facts and myths, and how to offer support. And that strategy is really simple. It's just all about checking in. So if you have time, I'd love to invite you to check out our course. It gives a certificate at the end. It's an excellent piece of professional development. It's also an excellent resource that you can share with people that you're working with. So with that, I am at my time. I'm going to hand it back to Annette. Thank you for letting me be this voice coming at you through the waves. And yeah, I'll hand it off to Annette.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dana, for this excellent presentation. We do have some questions that have come in, so that's great. So we still do have time. So if you do have more questions, feel free to send them along. The first question is related to digital violence. So you mentioned that briefly at the beginning around gender-based violence that's occurring online. And someone's just wondering if you could speak a little bit more to that, maybe in terms of, what does online GBV look like, and are you seeing an increase in this particular form of GBV?
I think, yeah, I want to talk a little bit about how we started to notice that this was an issue for people. So in our closed groups, we do this 8 week closed group. We have up to 15 participants, and we were actually noticing people talking about it when we were exploring what does abuse look like. So things that we weren't mentioning, we were using, sort of literature and diagrams, and people were talking about how much was happening in an online realm. Um, and from honestly a lot of young women who were talking about being ghosted around um, a demand for, kind of exploited imagery to be sent to, potential partners, people who they were being engaged with, a lot more sexual um, um, requests online, and all of it sort of framed within there. Well, if you love me, you'll send me. Um, I think I don't know about you. I don't have children, but what I am noticing is that there's a whole other realm of abuse happening in the world now that we've moved into these online environments. They can happen in a workplace where you're being harassed online with words, with images, with all kinds of things. So yeah, that's sort of how it came to be, and we do notice it disproportionately impacts young women.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Our next question is around stats, and do you know the stats or approximately how many times people typically go through the cycle of violence before they choose leaving for good?
No. Quite simply, I can say no. The cycle of violence, so you can move from honeymoon to explosion um, and all around again 10 times a day. It can happen that you can have a really good period for a very, very long time, months, in fact. And then suddenly you find yourself in that tension explosion phase that doesn't even go back to honeymoon anymore. In fact, a lot of women say, I don't know where the honeymoon is anymore. They might just find themselves in that tension and explosion.
Mhm.
Um, people leave when they're ready. People leave when they can. People leave when they have the resources that they need to do so. And I also have to say, people stay. I have conversations all the time where I'm helping people open up communication. I'm helping people take more control over their lives and have different kinds of conversations with their partner, but lots of people stay.
Okay, thank you. You covered some of this in the debriefing slide, but someone is wondering if you have any tried and true methods of, not taking it home. Any tips that you would want to offer there?
Yes, because I used to take it home. Um, I think one of the big things that I always try to do is even if I don't think I need to talk about it, um, I'll just see if
Mhm.
I can find a colleague for a minute to have a chat. And, you know, we've gotten into the habit of asking these questions, what did you notice about yourself there? And like, if it's a particularly difficult session, I often find myself feeling like super emotional. I'm so mad at the world. And that's the kind of stuff that I don't want to take home. I want to have good, clear, clean professional boundaries around the work that I do in the day and what I do at night because I think that how I behave in the world makes a difference to the work that I do. So, what I often find is I have to remind myself of how good the work is, how what a difference it can make to just be a listener. And that can really, like, even if I think I don't do enough or I'm not doing enough or I'm not making a difference, humor works a lot. It's like, well, I just had that hour. Um, she walked in the door. She got a service. Her evaluation says this was a really good thing for her. Sometimes you just got to believe it, and really that debriefing and that reflection can help you not take the work home.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's excellent. Thank you, Dana. I think we have time for a couple more questions. So in terms of this person, another person is wondering, how do we help people navigate GBV that happens primarily when the person or the person who's doing the abusing is drinking alcohol, and that's when it primarily happens. Are there things that we need to help people think about as they navigate that?
I think that kind of fits like into that category of this only happens when someone is drinking. I think it's really important to ask them and invite them to take perspective on their whole life.
Mhm.
And, we often think about abuse only as the bad parts. So maybe like teasing out the relationship and what it looks like really understanding. So, do you get to make decisions on your own about what you do and where you go, what you do with the money? Like, how do we talk about the cycle without talking about the cycle? How do we
Mhm.
ask questions about like really being curious about what the relationship looks like without the drinking is a great place to go in.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very helpful, Dana. Excellent. Yes. Another question that we have in terms of, as professionals, we can also experience GBV. And what are some things to be mindful of in terms of boundaries, when to refer, I guess, when providing GBV, if this is something that we've also experienced or have or experiencing?
Um, what a great question. Because, hi, like the fact is, if we know the stats, we know that on this call, maybe 200 of us fit in the realm. Um, I talked about the before being really know your triggers. Um, I can't tell you how many times I've sat across from my mother, sat across from my own personal lived experiences. And actually knowing that and letting other people in your life who you feel safe with know that too can help you um, answer that question of when you should refer. Like if you find yourself being really triggered and disappearing a lot when you're in conversations, you want to reflect on, is this something that I can work with or not work with? If you're in an active relationship where abuse is happening, you might not be able to do this work, and it's okay to hit the pause button and decide if you have that opportunity to make different choices about who you sit across from. That's for
Mhm.
sure. I don't, you know thyself is I think the most important thing about all of this work that we're doing, right?
Yes.
Uh, that's just the reality. I just like to say one thing about that, if I can. Um, how many times do we relate to what's happening in the people's lives that we sit across from? Like I'd say almost always. Like so it's gonna show up. It's just a reality of being a compassionate person doing this kind of work. But it's not your job to carry around people's issues. It's your job to really, take care of yourself. Like I really believe in a regimen of self care. So I have things that I know that are so important to my overall well being and how I live my life. And, maybe you are experiencing things in your life that are very difficult, but you can also counter all of that with how you take care of yourself.
Mhm. Yep. Excellent points. Thank you, Dana. Someone else is wondering how and can they, if they're outside of our province, Newfoundland and Labrador, can they do the e-course that you spoke about during the presentation?
I think they can, but what they're going to find is so, like all of our resourcing, all of our support stuff, there's some, we have pop ups to say, hey, here are some of the resources that you can use if you're feeling a certain way. They're very provincial specific. So, yeah, I'd encourage people to do it. We're really proud of it. And any feedback you have about it, please share with us. There's a little certificate at the end, which I'm really happy about these days.
Mhm.
And yeah, uptake is really good, and I encourage anybody to share this and
Yeah.
use it, especially in our province.
And another question just came in on the tail end of that question is there a fee to do the course?
Absolutely not. Free, very free. We were supported by the Newfoundland and Labrador Federation of Labor. We have pulled together little bits of money all over the place. I'll tell you something that a lot of people don't know is um, my previous career was in film production. So this was a beautiful marriage of two sets of skills for me. So I must say, it's a very robust course. It's
Mhm.
also um, accessible in terms of ASL, and I think that's like the first of its kind in terms of the depth and the robustness of it. Yeah, we're pretty proud of it.
Mhm. Wonderful, thank you. And I guess just one more question because we are running out of time. It's great to have so many questions coming in. Are there particular courses or workshops that you would recommend for people who want to learn more about gender-based violence and counseling?
Yeah, there are some things that I would recommend. Um, I'd like to go back to the beginning of what I said. Like, I really talked about relationships in kind of a heteronormative framework. It's really important that we understand queer and trans communities and how abuse happens. And I would recommend there's an alliance in the country. The name escapes me now. If you Google gender-based violence and queer and trans communities, you're going to find lots and lots of information. That's how I've learned. I learned by actually asking questions in my own community. Quadrangle is an organization that we do lots of work with. Planned Parenthood also, and also the Canadian Women's Foundation.org has incredible resourcing. Um, yeah, you can't find a better resource than that in terms of finding videos, making connections about resources in community stats, that kind of stuff. So there's lots of stuff out there if you just Google.
Okay, wonderful. So I guess I'll just wrap up our session for this morning. But I do want to take an opportunity to thank Dana for this stellar presentation and for sharing her knowledge, experience, and expertise regarding gender-based violence with us today. And I think regardless of your area of practice, learning more about gender-based violence and how to provide effective services is so important. And a lot of information was shared, and it truly is this kind of knowledge exchange, reflection, and continued learning that we can enhance our skills in the provision of essential and high quality services. And Dana, your passion for this work and for community-based social work practice is so inspirational. So thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your voice on a national platform as well. Great social work promotion. Just want to say that the PDF of the PowerPoint presentation is available on the handout section of the webinar platform. We did get a question around that. You'll also find information on different ways that you can get involved during National Social Work Month. And if you go to socialworkisessential.ca, you can share your story and win some great prizes from CSW as well. And finally, we ask that you complete the evaluation that will appear on your screen. As always, everyone's feedback is so greatly appreciated. So thanks again, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day and all the remaining Social Work Month activities and celebrations. Thank you, everyone.